to VPG's Virtual Water Cooler Chat podcast, a platform that celebrates the rich tapestry of professional diversity, with a particular emphasis on empowering women. We aim to foster diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA, for all, while recognizing and championing the achievements of everyone as a central pillar of our journey. In our conversations, we explore a wide spectrum of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives, creating a vibrant mosaic that enriches our collective understanding and strengthens our commitment to diversity and empowerment. I had the pleasure of chatting with Haley Moss Esquire. Haley is a frequently sought-after keynote speaker and leader on diversity, inclusion, and neurodiversity in the workplace. Haley was diagnosed with autism when she was 3 years old. Today, Haley is a Florida licensed attorney, TEDx and keynote speaker, author, advocate, and consultant. Although Haley is not in active practice, she is committed to making life better for individuals with disabilities through her speaking, writing, and consulting. Haley is also the author of several books and numerous articles that center around neurodiversity in the workplace, and she is a passionate advocate for such topics. As a consultant, Haley helps transform organizations into inclusive and accessible spaces for individuals with disabilities. Speaking on these topics allows Haley to share both her personal and professional experiences, bringing forth legal knowledge and individual perspectives across varying professions and settings. She is thrilled to share her expertise and learned life lessons with everyone she can. To learn more about the value Haley may bring, feel free to connect with Haley on LinkedIn or visit haley.moss.com. Let's get started with today's chat.
Hello, Haley Moss. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation to be on a virtual water cooler chat. I know that you've been running from one airport to another, so I especially appreciate you being here with us. How are you otherwise?
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it has been a little bit of a busy day, but it is good to be here and get to chat with you. That makes things a lot better.
Well, thank you. The pleasure is all mine. I think but for the diversity panel at the PTAB Bar Association and Fahad Patel, I would not have met you. And that would be a shame.
Agreed. That was probably one of the best parts of PTAB is getting to meet you and getting to work with you and immediately realizing, oh my gosh, you are so cool and so much fun to hang out with. And when you said we can have this conversation once we all got home, I was so excited.
There's also the rest of the PTAB Bar Annual Conference Committee. So I am only one of the cool person.
but I got to work with you. So I'm a little bit more sentimental about getting to enjoy you.
Awesome. I really was very impressed, and I did some research. I even bought your book, one of the books. The other one's on its way. I wanted to first thank you for being so authentic and speaking out to people, especially when it is not an easy topic. And I'm not going to say that you're being brave because this is just part of being you. I've listened to enough podcasts to know how your response might be. So tell us a little bit about Haley Moss growing up and who you are so that for those people that did not have the pleasure of meeting you can now hear firsthand from the virtual water cooler chat.
Okay, wow. Getting to describe myself always feels kind of weird. So I think I'm just going to talk about myself a little bit more personally than professionally, because if I feel like I'm reading my bio, it just does not feel authentic. And I know authenticity is something we take very seriously around here. So, hi, everyone. It's wonderful to get to chat with you and to meet you. I'm Haley Moss. I always describe myself professionally as an attorney by trade and an educator by choice. But in real life, I am just a person who is doing the best that she can on any given day, just like most of us are. I am proudly autistic. I was diagnosed with autism back in the 90s when I was a toddler. I was largely non-speaking. I made my parents' life harder than it probably should have been. I was crying and screaming, got myself kicked out of preschool. I was somehow doing all these big jigsaw puzzles, but couldn't really communicate, all sorts of different things that led to my family having questions about whether I was gifted or whether I was deaf. They really didn't know at the time what was going on with me, because I didn't respond to certain things. I wasn't talking, but clearly the lights were on somewhere inside of my little brain. So when they got the autism news, it was definitely very shocking. We didn't have the level of information that we have available today. Being in 2024, we have so much more available to us. The internet's no longer in its infancy. I don't think once upon a time, nearly 27 or So years ago, we would have imagined getting to have these conversations like we are now over Zoom or other podcasting software and things like that. So big changes when you look at it from kind of a retrospective of where we've been and where we've come from. Other things that I always like to share about that journey. So my parents were told all the things that I would never do. They were told that I would never get my driver's license, that I wouldn't make friends, that I wouldn't graduate from high school, everything that I would never do. And thankfully, they took that as a load of BS, to put it lightly. And they believed in me and said yes when the world said no. I think it's pretty clear that I have at least survived something in this life. I did graduate from high school. I did get my driver's license, so I can't park to save my life. I do have friends and a fulfilling life outside of work. I went to law school. I'm still extremely proud of that. I still can't believe I passed the bar exam sometimes, and I took the bar exam back in 2018, and it still doesn't feel real that it's behind me because I still have nightmares about it, as so many attorneys probably still do. But I had always wanted to advocate for myself and others. I fell into advocacy actually by accident as a teenager, got invited to a conference when I was 13 in Orlando, Florida. The only reason that 13-year-olds want to do anything in Orlando is they want to go to the Disney parks, even when you grew up in Florida like yours truly. So my trip to the Disney parks ended up being the trip that changed my life. And I was invited and asked about my story and, hey, maybe you might want to write a book about this very specific experience of being a teenager on the autism spectrum. And I was just like, sure, let's go, let's do it. And life has been a roller coaster ever since. So I have been advocating in a public sphere now for over half of my life, which is wild to think about. And I enjoy it. I get to have fun. I get to meet interesting people, and hopefully other people get to learn something along the way. And I learn something from everybody I meet. So I always think I'm the lucky one.
That's amazing. Now, one of the things that most people do not ask on the podcast, or at least I have not come across, is that you also illustrate. You're an artist.
I am, and I usually don't get to talk about my art that much because
Good.
I don't get to do a lot of anymore because time just gets away from me. But originally, when I first started sharing my story and stuff, a lot of the time I was just known as the teenage artist on the spectrum, which was a very interesting moniker considering most of the time I was mainly drawing and painting. A lot of my paintings were being auctioned off and donated to charities to help raise money for nonprofits and organizations that were working with children with disabilities, in particular, autistic kids and whatnot, and their families. So for me, it was always this cool philanthropic thing. And right now, it's just more of a hobby and also a little bit of that. So it's something I enjoy. I love color. I love things that are very bright. I am very inspired by anime and pop culture, and I just love color. I am obsessed with color. I want things to be very interesting. Of course, the great irony of my obsession with color is the fact that I am wearing almost all black today, but that is because I was in airports and things like that, and I wanted to be comfortable and warm and not really care too much about what happened at 6 a.m. today. So that's kind of a little bit about me, as well as that I genuinely love it. And for me, I really got invested in the arts as well because just going through the world as an autistic person is so overwhelming sometimes. And art was sort of my escape from that, is I would just be able to sit down and make things and do things and have no clue what's going on in the outside world, that I'd be able to just let my imagination run wild and do things that hopefully brought me a sense of calm and also made other people smile. So that was always very cool. Being an illustrator also has its perks in law school. When I was in law school, I was known as the illustrator. So all of my friends and stuff would want me in. My classmates would make me do all the creative projects, which got me out of a lot of cool stuff, or got me into a lot of cool stuff. I got to make posters for campaigns. I got to make posters and things on behalf of my classmates and our one all section and whatnot when we had professors that had absences for medical things and things like that. So it's always been a very interesting skill set to have, and it means that I get to look at things a little bit differently. Being creative is something that I feel like we don't get enough credit for. And usually when we talk in legal and whatnot, we usually don't think about it. So I always like when people ask me about artwork. It makes me happy. It makes me smile.
One of the reasons why I wanted to ask you that question is because I did my research on Amazon and see how many books did Haley Mostert, author. And I came across something like about middle school. And basically the topic was introduced to people going into college for like freshmen. And then there was like other ones with the illustration that really caught my eye.
Mhm.
And at VPG, we also has like a group of young artists that I work with. They don't do patent stuff. but I have them help with illustrated 2 books, one of them. And she is an artist and graduated high school, but she's taking her gap years trying to figure out her life directions.
Mm-hmm.
So she helped me with 2 books with the illustration. The first one was a little bit less complex, and the second one, we have like different scenes because, obviously I have to negotiate and navigate with my own budget because everything is like self-funded.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that I pay people is coming from my paycheck. And then every once in a while, I would have people like sponsor me to do something, then I could actually be a little bit more generous. And to me, in legal space,
Mm-hmm.
there's not always that much room for creativity. And I think that is such a shame in
It
that
really is.
sense.
It really is. And I think there's so much as well as how many creative people end up getting into the legal space because there's no room for you to be creative somewhere else, or that a lot of creative work doesn't pay the way that people want it to. I think of how many people have traded a creative dream sometimes to enter the legal profession. And I know that's kind of a philosophical thought, but how many people really give up on something they genuinely love because they realize they need to survive in some other way? I think that's also the thing is that law school and just being in legal, you're kind of trained to think a certain way, and you get a little bit more cynical, you get a little bit more analytical, and you don't have that running room to just let your imagination go.
Well, let's talk about the cynicism then.
That is kind of
Let's go there.
I was going to say that's probably a little bit more cynical than I intended it to be,
You know
but
what? It's so true though. How many people can actually survive that cynicism
and think
and
of
then
how many
actually
people
be willing to be authentic and come
yeah,
out and say, hey, this is truly me. I
yeah.
actually had some attorneys that were really good at drawing.
Mhm.
And so when I went to their office before, this is when I was working at a firm, when I
Mhm.
went to the office and he just had like amazing drawings. I was like, you could have a side hustle. Because like, yeah, I could,
So
but
I,
I don't have
I was like
time.
that. I was like that too when I was in practice. So I decorated my office with my own work. I still have my apartment decorated with my own work because I moved into my apartment when I was in law school, and I was a firm believer, and still am, by the way. I'm a very firm believer in not doing posters. Like, you know how when you're a student and you're young, you tape posters to your wall with like push pins and like paper posters. I do not believe in that. I am enough of an artist and fine arts enthusiast that I would never do posters. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to paint a bunch of stuff to put on my walls. And I never took it down. And I feel like that there's some kind of like feeling that I have, and I can't really name about how kind of conceited, I guess, maybe it is to have your own art on your walls because we're our own harshest critic. But I genuinely think it's cool and it makes me happy, even though I am my own harshest critic on my own work. And once I started working and the Florida heat and humidity started taking its toll through the windows, I started framing things. So then it
Mm.
a little bit more complete because I had canvases that started warping from just years of sun exposure. And I'm like, I don't want to paint something new. I'm just going to frame these and make it force the canvas to go back to where it's supposed to. And it looks a lot more substantial than when I started at 21 years old and had all this stuff on my walls because I didn't know how to decorate or couldn't afford the artwork that I thought I wanted to decorate with because, 21 years old and new student, new apartment, new everything. So it was kind of a funny thing. And I guess in a way it made me ahead of my peers because I did not have posters. I had stuff. I had canvases with paint on them. I had canvas prints that were with beautiful digital high resolution color because I work digitally as well as traditionally. I do a little bit of everything. Jack of all trades, master of none, but I find it very fun to get to use different mediums, different things to play with. I just don't know how to sculpt, unfortunately. That's the one thing I want to learn. And somebody I met at PTAB actually was talking to me about that the other day and told me that when I have time in my schedule that I should relax and go take a pottery class. And I was like, yeah, that might be a good idea.
I actually was talking to a friend of mine, and she said that she's going to do a watercolor class. And I
Mhm.
said, I don't know how to do that. And I said, but I really want to do the pottery class. And she goes like, let's go. I'm like, okay,
Hey,
let's go.
I will go to a pottery class with you too. So the last
Okay,
time
we
I
just have to figure out when we go to all meet.
yes. So the last art class I got to take, because I am mostly self-taught, is I had gone on a date years ago and they wanted to go to painting with a twist, thinking I would enjoy it. And all I remember was opening a bottle of wine and painting these really funny looking giraffes. And it definitely did not turn out the way that I intended it to.
I did one of those wine painting class as well, and then I painted like a wine glass with like some red wine pouring
Oh, I
in.
remember that one. Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't that great, but I still have it.
But it's the memory that you make along the way.
Exactly. I went with a bunch of friends, and then I don't think any of us actually did exceptionally well, but it was a lot of fun.
Nobody did. I remember going on it was a first date, which made it even better because it was just so awkward for what it was. But we both had a great time because you had this shared experience and you're just laughing your way through the fact that and you were like, I don't think this looks like a giraffe.
Well, I did
It's
some
open to interpretation. Maybe it was an abstract giraffe.
it's an abstract giraffe. I think that's what it is.
That's what I'm telling myself is it was an abstract giraffe.
This is going to be a difficult question
Okay.
because of the number of words that I'm going to ask you to limit down to. If you have to choose 3 words to describe you, what 3 words will best depict Haley?
That is a really good question. I think I would say that I am curious, resilient, and creative.
And why?
I think part of being a person with a disability means you're forced to be resilient. You are forced to overcome. You are kind of forced into navigating a world that isn't built with you in mind and that's inherently inaccessible. And you always have to come back stronger somehow. That somehow I feel like I have been able to survive and thrive through a lot of things that I look back and I go, I don't even know how I did that. That's pretty cool. Wow. Go you.
Yeah, go
So
you.
I know that's kind of a weird thing when you look back on your own career and your own life, but a lot of the time I look at younger me and I'm like, you did good. Because I don't know if current me can do that same thing. If you threw me into taking a bar exam right now, I can't say it would go well. But somehow younger me was able to hunker down, actually develop study habits, and do the thing. So I have to admit there is a level of resilience to all of these different things and also just existing in an ableist world as a person who is disabled or neurodivergent. I am curious because I want to know everything. I feel like I always want to understand people and the world around me. I always want to touch everything. I'm very sensory seeking in that matter. I'm very avoidant when it comes to things like sounds, but when I want to touch everything, I want to explore things. I want to learn as much as I can. I want to be as empathetic and feeling and all that. So I always think it's more of a curiosity because I don't know if I describe myself as empathetic, other people kind of look at me with a confused feeling because the way that I express empathy and the way that I feel things might not look the same as other people do. But most people can get behind that curiosity. And that creativity kind of goes hand in hand with that resilience. So I was thinking, it's a kind of like that I want to always make new things, explore new ideas, and also that you have to have a level of creativity to survive and come up with new solutions in order to just navigate the world. On top of the fact, I just enjoy doing all sorts of things like writing and drawing and making things and dreaming with that big imagination that doesn't always get to come out that much on these types of things.
Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that I would like to, I've read part of your book. Admittedly, I have not finished. It's very
That's
fine
okay.
print. The ABA one is like
Hey, I don't
really
blame you.
long. So
I don't
I
blame you. It was
am
my labor of love when I wrote it, and I also feel like I don't get to read my own work too much either. So I feel you.
no, that's okay. I just wanted to be completely honest that I got through like maybe chapter 2.
That's fine.
Yes.
You got through something. You got to see something.
Yes. I was highlighting post-it notes and everything. So I wanted to understand. And some of this is that I'm a very curious person. So
I love it.
the three characteristics that you use to describe you,
Mhm.
it would actually be at least some of the vocabulary that I use to describe myself.
That explains why we get along so well.
Maybe. So I wonder if you could share with our audience, do you like experience a lot of sensory overload? How does that play out? And how do you overcome some of the challenges, especially when you are frequent like speakers,
Mhm.
bright lights and all those things and loud noises? How do you
Oh my
sort
gosh.
of balance that?
That's a great question. And I think for me, what makes it so difficult is that everything sort of like feels overwhelming. And I say everything feels overwhelming because most of my sensory systems turned up to 11. And it also depends on how my day is going. So if I'm very tired and didn't sleep enough, everything feels that much more amplified, is that much more loud and crowded and more likely to make me feel overwhelmed in a sensory capacity. I can tune out a lot of things in this life. I can tune out crowds. I can tune out smell because I don't have a very good sense of smell anyway. So thankfully, that's a sensory thing I don't have to worry about. I don't eat a lot of different things, so the taste doesn't overwhelm me. It's usually loud and crowded. That's enough to send me through. And I think you actually got to see this kind of firsthand when we were at the reception at PTAB, as I was very overwhelmed. And I was trying to either stay near the walls because that's usually where things get quieter. I was trying to avoid the chandeliers with all the crystals on them, even though I think they're very pretty to look at. Because if I look at them too long and I am overwhelmed in some way, it just feels like a lot, or it's the thing that's going to distract me to kind of tune out the fact that the people in the crowd and the sounds of 5,000 different people talking. I know that's kind of an exaggeration, but you get where I'm going with this,
Totally.
that I need to somehow tune all that out. And for me, usually what I do is I figure out what is my escape plan? How am I going to handle this? Because I don't want to be the person who doesn't go to things. I don't want to be the person who's excluded or excludes myself. I want to be a part of everything. So I'm always thinking, okay, I can stay for X amount of time. I could give out a certain amount of business cards at like a networking thing, and then I'm good. And then I did something that I feel comfortable with, and I can go home or up to the hotel room, what have you, at the end. I also always have headphones. I always have snacks. I feel like it's like being the mom of the friend group in a way that keeps me in a good
I have
place.
snacks.
I have snacks too. I have snacks too. So these were in my airport bag. They're gummy worms.
Oh, really? I have the mochi rice nuggets, the crispy crunch
Yeah,
from Trader
I always
Joe's.
pick up something in the airport, even though I have protein bars and actual snacks. But I always am tempted by the candies. But yeah, and those things also, in a way, are sensory calming because think about how even eating can be a very sensory experience. It is for me. Like I love sometimes getting to crunch on certain things, and I feel like, oh, this is actually something that keeps me feeling relaxed or calm or something else. So it's actually very interesting for me. And I am learning to do better at advocating for myself when things feel like too much. But I try to rest when I can, and I try to spend time with people that I love and enjoy outside of what I do. I feel like for me, one of the biggest things as well is having that kind of healthy separation. Because, like you said, I travel a lot, I meet a lot of people, is I try to have a little bit of a balance between my life on the road, life at work, who I am, public facing, and also try to have a life that is for me. There's things that I do because I want to do them, like drawing for fun. I don't have to post all that on social media to have a good time or to say that it's still relevant to my life. I just can do it because I want to. I don't have to monetize every hobby that I have. I can do things simply because it brings me joy. So, what I've been trying to do more of, especially from a sensory and just overwhelmed perspective, is bring more joy into my life, which means I got back to collecting Pokemon cards again. I play more video games. I read more books. I do more drawing and trying to take up a different painting project now and again. I'm always trying to do something to keep myself happy, to bring joy back into my life wherever I can. And it doesn't always mean I have to be sociable to get that joy. And I know a lot of people feed off of socializing. I am someone who enjoys it from time to time, and other times just end up completely exhausted. But realizing that I can balance these things a little bit better makes it less likely that I'm going to burn out and makes me feel recharged enough that I can handle the very overwhelming stuff, especially sensory wise and socially.
So would it be accurate to say that you are an introvert?
I am 100% an introvert.
Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense. I am an ambivert, but only because people
I can
argue with me about me being an introvert. I'm like, okay,
I
fine,
can convince
I will find a middle point, but I'm definitely not an extrovert.
I love it. I can convince you that I'm an ambivert or an extrovert, but I am not by any means. You know me outside of work, absolutely not. And I also feel like that's the thing with being a public speaker is everyone thinks there's this level of bravery to share your story, to get up there in front of a whole group of people, that you must be extroverted by nature. I have a much easier time talking to the crowd than like how they had the tables of people in the ballrooms and all that stuff like during lunch and all that stuff. You put me at a table like that, I will not say more than about 5 words unless you explicitly talk to me. I am more comfortable with a one-on-one conversation like we're having now, or in front of 500 people. You put me in front of 8, I am lost. So that's probably the biggest proof that I can give you in a professional setting that I'm definitely not an extrovert.
I'm glad that we have another thing in common. The legal space, at
Mhm.
least in my opinion, is not one of the most forgiving ones.
Oh no. I'm glad that somebody's willing to be honest about it because I just usually say legal is a dinosaur and it's taking time to catch up and get to where it's supposed to be because tech companies and other industries have gotten on board with inclusion and being a little bit more gracious towards human beings a lot sooner.
Well, it is getting better, but I think that there's just still so much more that need to be done.
Hmm.
And I think that what you have done, especially at the panel, along with Vinsurf and Bismarck and Dave Heiger, that
Hmm.
was just one of the most exceptional panel on DEIA that I have actually had the pleasure of organizing, but also witness.
Hmm.
And I think part
Fun.
of it is that it was so unscripted
Hmm.
that people are not just like outlining to death, it's like this is what we're gonna do, go from 1, 2, 3, and then we will just play slides. And pre-pandemic, I would always want to have something like a PowerPoint. That's just, that's just what I'm used to. Like
Yeah.
the first thing is like if you do a Markman, it was your tech tutorial is like the 50 pages for like what 30 minutes, and how is anyone going to understand? But you
Yeah.
have to get through that, right?
Hmm.
So I thought that that was just a very genuine
Hmm.
panel, and I think that's why it was so powerful because
Yeah.
each one of you spoke about your lived experiences.
Hmm.
Now that's a panel, but at the same time, when you had to share with people about your stories, knowing that the legal space is not one of the most forgiving one, were you
Hmm.
scared?
Not really. And I know
Oh,
that
okay.
sounds silly that I wasn't scared because one, I don't think I had the knowledge going into this that the legal space was what it was. I didn't really know any lawyers. I had been advocating and sharing my story before I even entered the legal profession and industry.
Disney World.
So I already was like, you know what, this is who I am. Any employer, anybody that I encounter in legal is going to know this about me, whether I want them to or not. I might as well just embrace it and give them a reason not to be afraid of it. Because if I am hiding around it, if I'm beating around the bush, it's going to seem like I have a secret that I'm ashamed of. And I have nothing to be ashamed of. I am proud to be a person with a disability. I think the disability community is made up of some of the coolest, most resilient and fun and passionate people you will ever meet. They make the best friends and colleagues, and I just love my community deeply. And if we all are not disclosing, especially if you have a non-apparent disability, it just keeps contributing to that stigma that this is something to hide, something to be ashamed of. So in a way, even though it wasn't really my intention to make it better for other people, because that wasn't what I thought I was going to do entering the profession of sharing my story, I thought that I was going to do the best I could, hope that something that I did made a difference for other people. I did want to get into civil rights litigation actually when I got started in law school and all that, realized that I am a little too empathetic and would be thinking about people all day long. And I thought that would be a little bit much for me to handle. So I chose to deal with, corporations and hospitals and not individuals because I didn't care what corporations and hospitals did after 5 p.m. every day. That's always my answer is that corporations, even though they are people in the eyes of the law, they don't do things after 5 p.m. that can get them in trouble, or they can't have like, as one of the first people I worked with when I did work an internship in civil rights, had epilepsy, and I was worried that this client was going to have a seizure. Every night I'd be thinking, did you have a seizure? Are you okay? I don't want to live my life like that. I am very empathetic. Like I said, I worry about people, I care about people, but I don't want to care about people to my own detriment. So that is kind of something I was thinking about too, but I genuinely do want things to be better for other people. And that's why I wanted to do this too. But realizing that there was this huge gap in the legal field when we talk about disability, when we talk about neurodivergence, and that is rooted in shame, especially in legal because of the bar admissions process. Just a lot to take in. So I hope that things have gotten better. They definitely have gotten better from what I've been able to observe and take part in, but I still feel like there's a long way to go.
Absolutely. And I think one of the key thing is that you spoke about empathy a lot. And I think sometimes people do not understand and could have used some additional educations in terms of the differences between sympathy versus empathy. I'm sure that, you do not want people to say, oh, I'm so sorry, there's nothing to be sorry about,
Mhm.
but instead of like, I understand where you're coming from.
Exactly. I think that's a great way to look at it is I'm sorry versus I understand.
Yeah.
Or I
So
want to understand, or I'll sit with you with this feeling.
yeah, I mean, just no two people are the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that this is in your book, is I think is no two autistic person are the same because everybody has a slightly different. And I will stop at that because I'm not quite sure how best I can just depict that. You wrote that in your book already.
Yeah. I don't want it to be that we're all the same. And I think the more I think about it, the more I think if we all fought and acted the same, it would be really boring.
Boring.
And we'd probably all be robots. And we just didn't admit that we were robots.
Well, now we just have to check that at box. I am not a robot.
Yeah. Maybe we are robots. Maybe we are robots and we've achieved consciousness. I really don't know. I don't think that's what's happened, but stranger things go on in the universe. But thankfully, we are all unique in how we work and experience the world. And even when we think about like that thing that I was saying about how no two autistic people are the same too, that goes for any marginalized group. That just because you met two people from the same culture or similar background or they're from the same place, that doesn't mean that they're going to be exactly the same or have the same preferences or the same personality. There are plenty of autistic people I get along with. There are plenty of autistic people I absolutely do not enjoy speaking with because we're just different people, or that we aren't all just innocent little nice lambs. And sometimes people think that about people with disabilities is you're all these like innocent, cute little kids. And sometimes adults can, be mean. They can be difficult. They can be just not your cup of tea for whatever the reason. So I think that's something that's really beautiful is that not every one of us is going to be best friends because we have a shared experience. And not every single one of us is going to have that same experience, that having maybe one label in common or one identity in common doesn't mean that we are going to just immediately vibe. And that's cool.
So much of it is also the fear of the unknown. And so throughout this education process and speaking out and sharing your stories, do you have any stories that you can share about helping to make workplace much better for neurodivergent individuals?
I want everything to be accessible forever. And I think that's hard to do because there is no one size fits all. Because like we said, every single person is different. That what is accessible for me might not be more accessible for somebody else. It might make their life harder. But a lot of it does boil down to empathy and communication when we think about making things more inclusive in the workplace, is it does come to understanding what somebody needs to be successful. And what I need and what you need might not be the same thing. Even if you're neurotypical, you still have access needs, even if you don't know it, that there's something that can be done to make your job less stressful and have clearer communication and let you do your job better. For instance, even the fact that you had a draft of what the questions would be before our conversation, even though I clearly did not seem to look at them too deeply because I want to have an organic conversation, much like you enjoyed from listening to the panel at PTAB, that you want these conversations to be organic. I just look to make sure things don't look completely wrong, essentially. And I think that helps so many people to know what to expect because some people really need that structure. They need that guidance. They need to prepare in advance. Other people, not so much, but you don't want to go, surprise, we're going to talk for an hour and it's going to be whatever I want to talk about for an hour. And that's kind of scary in its own way for so many people. So think about how things like that can be accessibility things. Having a transcript of things like this. There's so much that I think about in terms of everything, not just workplace, but workplace accessibility and neurodivergent people. I think about how many get screened out of great jobs because they self-select or people assume that they're not capable or based on how we're being judged. So if you've ever interviewed for a job, you probably know it's like an extended theater production that you have to basically smile and have the perfect script and give the right answer at the right time and be extremely likable. And for so many neurodivergent people, that can be very difficult. You have to make eye contact. You have to have an answer off the top of your head. Sometimes you're going to get asked something that's completely unrelated to what your skill set is, or you're going to have three different people staring you down. And I talked to an HR person a couple of years ago who said one question that she's been asked was something like, how do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Because they wanted to see what kind of creative answer she would give. And I just remember hearing this and going, I would literally not have a good answer for you, or I would question why you're asking me about making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in a job interview or something like that. Even though I know it's a personality thing or how you creatively solve a problem, that might not be relevant. And there's nothing that can prepare how you're going to get judged for something silly. And if I don't look at you enough, you're going to think I don't care or that I'm lying to you when really it's just uncomfortable for me to look at somebody straight in the eyeballs for a long time. And also, there's people who have resume gaps because they don't get the same chances in employment. So there's so much at the beginning that screens out great people, or that you have to grab great people skills. And maybe it's not even a people-facing customer service type role, let alone the fact that we don't do a great job supporting people who are already working in organizations with accommodations or making sure that we communicate clearly, or we say something like, oh, you're not a culture fit, or you're not trying hard enough. But really, this person's giving their all. And what is a culture fit is really subjective. That's a lot of feelings.
Yeah, there is a lot of feeling. I think I love the fact that when you went there with culture fit, when I first started, I was mostly hiring for culture fit.
Mm-hmm.
And then now I am looking for cultural contribution.
That's a better way to look at it, I think, too.
Growing up Chinese American and then like culture wise is much more traditional. And a lot of things is like in terms of looking at authority, it was much more hierarchical. So my own managerial style, it was very hierarchical. It's not until I started running VPG, not even the first 2 years, because the first 2 years I was running my company the same way that I was basically when I was at law firms. And I ran into so much problems. Not that I don't have problems, I have different kinds of problems now. But I was much more willing to listen. Part of the thing about work culture is that it's very difficult for people to have safe conversation.
For
Because
sure.
you don't know whether you're going to be judged. You don't know whether anything you said may be penalized. And that's one of the things that I love, the fact that I have the autonomy to basically make up my own culture the way that I want to. And sometimes I had completely been called that you're just being passive aggressive. I'm like, no, you need to look up the definition of passive aggressive. If anything, I am aggressive. And so, I mean,
at least you own it. You have to own your stuff.
you
And
own your stuff. And sometimes it's like, hey, you know what? No one pulled me aside to say, hey, this is the right way to do it. And
there
there's
is no real
no,
right way. And it's being honest about your personality and who you are too, that while you might be aggressive and ambitious about some things, I also have to point out there's something about you that feels very safe. Because
me.
think about the conversations that we're having, that even just getting to open up about a little bit of cynicism, a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of storytelling, there's a level of trust there. So something that you're doing is inspiring safety in me, and I'm sure other people too. So you have to keep that in mind when we talk about culture and contributing to culture. It does require a little bit of leading with vulnerability and that curiosity that you and I were talking about earlier, because you want people to feel safe. And I think that's something you do very well.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. See, I even say thank you. If it were in Chinese, I would say, oh, Nali, Nali, you know, no, it's nothing at all. That I kind of let that go. They said that it's not a great thing. When someone gives you a compliment, you should just say thank you. So thank you, Haley.
I keep it real with everybody.
I love it.
I'm happy to tell you what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling in the moment, if I can translate it, because sometimes my brain moves faster than my mouth does, and then I don't get the words that I want to get out.
Well, the thing is, it has not always been this safe with me in talking because, like I said, I was very hierarchical, and also I self-censor a lot because I don't know what is safe. And I don't know that how much of it, I think a lot of it has a mix of culture and then, professional settings and then certain things that I don't think is appropriate to say. So I self-censor. And so I don't think it's intentionally being non-authentic. It's just that I had a lot of fear. If I say this, what would be the consequences? So I think growing up, I had a lot of fear. Versus you just kind of say it. And me, it's not until literally after I decided that I'm going to become a business owner. And I really honestly just want to travel.
That's a good reason.
That's a good reason. I'm going to Norway and Iceland in May with mom. So that's a good reason. But a lot of it is just that I'm still learning as I go. And many of my team members are actually, they're kind of mixed between millennial and Gen Zers.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of value differences, and I don't always, I'll tell them, I say, I don't always see eye to eye because this is not how I was raised. Not in my culture, not my upbringing. And my parents did not come from money. And so there's a lot of things that I know that if I need to get somewhere, I need to work really hard. English is not my first language. So for a long time, I used to tell people that I'm very inarticulate. Like, what are you talking about? So we are our own harshest critic. You're totally right. When you're talking about your art, there were so many things that I was just like, I think I just gave like the most horrible presentation. Like, what are you talking about? Were you at the same presentation that I was? And I'm trying to actively conquer those feelings.
Yeah.
So that I do not self-select to miss out on opportunities. And I don't think that is really
That's important. And
that is.
And you said something really interesting too when you were talking about how English isn't your first language. And something that I wanted to share is just give yourself a little bit of grace, and other people need to give you that grace too. It's not easy when you are trying to assimilate or understand a culture that might not be yours. And I think that that's true for any marginalized group for that matter. If you are neurodivergent, if English is your second or third or fourth language, if you are in a place that maybe just doesn't feel like naturally home, I guess is the best way to describe it. And people usually are really harsh to judge you. Like, why don't you just understand that? Why don't you just try harder? Why don't you speak better English? Why don't you do X, Y, and Z? And really just give us the grace, because how many people really speak multiple languages? How many people can communicate with different groups of people and switch between those different skill sets? The way that I have to communicate with my neurodivergent friends and colleagues is very different than the way that I communicate with my neurotypical friends and colleagues. And I have to effortlessly almost go between those two very distinct styles of being in this world to make everybody feel included and to also not get the same blowback. And that's a little bit of self-censoring at times. Also, I think sometimes people just don't know how to interpret. So I'm very honest and I will share with you how I feel. And a lot of the times I've noticed neurotypical people think I'm really funny. And I think sometimes they think I'm really funny because I'm saying the things that I would say normally that they do not have it in them to say because they'll self-censor. And I'm like, I'm not trying to have a good sense of humor. I'm just keeping it real with you. And meanwhile, there's people who actually think I'm funny that aren't neurotypicals. I'm like, okay, that's a sense of humor. If it's neurodivergent people who think I'm funny, I'm like, you guys have a sense of humor or understand my sense of humor when I'm actually trying to be funny, while neurotypicals think I'm funny when I'm willing to say the honest thing or the elephant in the room because I'm pointing it out for some reason while they won't point it out. Kind of like a Seinfeld episode. I feel like my life is kind of like a sitcom a lot of the time. And other people think it's funny. And I'm like, you know what? I just notice these things that don't make sense. I don't understand because this is not my predominant level of understanding and interacting with the world. And I don't understand, why do people do this?
It's so amazing that, like, for example, when you were giving the diversity breakfast keynote, the first thing that you said, I'm just going to address the elephant in the room. Like, do you know how many people in that room probably wants to, like, say the same thing and the things that they notice? And many of us do not have the courage to speak out.
I don't even know if it's courage sometimes, because sometimes I look back on things that I say and that I will speak out about and go, or that I will share and I go, is this fearlessness or stupidity? And I really don't always know the answer.
It might be somewhere in between.
It might be. Or maybe it's a whole other third thing that we don't really know. But it's something I genuinely wonder, because I think there is a level of stupidity into saying things that no one else will say. I think there's a level of fearlessness and bravery to it. And then there's some other third thing that I can't really come up with the word for.
I don't know that I would say stupidity, maybe a little bit of an innocent.
That's fair.
That's
the third thing then. Yeah, it's a little bit of
it's innocent.
Like an innocence or a naivete. I think that's
yes, exactly. That's the argument that I was thinking about.
That's why we have to work together with our brains, because that's how we come up with that third thing that I might not have the language for, that's floating around. Yes. I'm like, yes, you got this. Yes.
I got you.
And I got you.
Thank you. So what does DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility mean to you? And what do you do I mean, I know what you do already, and I'm pretty sure that you're applying this in the way that you are kind of embracing the stories that you have and go out there and basically share with others the with share with others in the community so that they can be in the position to give accessibility to the community. So, but I'm sure that you will have a better wording for that. I'm just like trying to come out with what I'm
No,
planning to say.
hey, I got you. To me, DEIA is really just about making sure that people feel that they belong and giving space to those who often go unseen, unheard, and ignored. That it's not that we aren't there. And I think that's something that happens a lot, is a lot of us just go unheard or ignored. That it's not something that's a secret that, diversity exists in this arena. And I look at access as making sure everybody can participate and do things if they want to, and not be told no for something arbitrary. You want to be the one to say no. You don't want other people to tell you no. So I would look at it as, even an event, for instance, I want to be the one who says, that sounds great, but I just don't feel like it. Or I have another conflict other than I can't go because I have no reliable transportation to get there. You want me to self-select for the right reasons of I simply just don't care or I don't want to go versus I can't go because something is in my way. So I look at it as we take away these obstacles, we make it that everybody feels safe, has that sense of belonging, and that we actually just connect on a human level. Because so often when we talk about DEIA and accessibility and disability in particular, that really makes me feel uncomfortable, is that we look at these stories as things that happen to other people. We look at it as not someone that we know. We look at this is a whole other experience that has nothing to do with me, when really it has everything to do with me. I might have no clue what it is like to be you on any given day, but we have more in common than we think we do. And even just this conversation we've learned we have far more in common than we originally thought we did. And I think that's part of what makes DEIA so human. So if anything, it's just a human connection and really kind of elevating those human connections and making it so that we can keep having them.
That's totally fair. I love it. To wrap this up, what are some of the advice, say two advice that you would give to others, organizations, to make things more accessible to people with disabilities and make them feel more included?
My first piece of advice to you would be to actually talk to the disabled people you know and have within your organization, because they know better than some random person who's never been there before. And it's very weird having a bunch of able-bodied and neurotypical people making those decisions on behalf of another community. It's kind of like having a bunch of men deciding the fate of every women's issue ever. That they don't know what it's like to be a woman, for instance. Like that probably sounds like an oversimplification, but it makes a lot of sense. So it happens a lot in disability world, not just in the corporate setting, but I think about when they used to have those commercials that would raise money for different disability causes. You would hear from the doctors, you would hear from the family members, you would hear from teachers, and you wouldn't hear from the person who's living it. And I'd be like, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? Is this what they want? And you didn't always know. So my first piece of advice is always include disabled people in the work that you're doing, because they know. They know what they need, and don't just get one person. You don't want the token. Like, you want to make people really feel included, because my opinion is probably not the same as the person who's been at your organization for 15 years and has a non-apparent disability and has never said a word. Or maybe they did say something, but they didn't feel comfortable asking for an accommodation. I look at it as, how do we make sure that we have disabled voices at the table no matter what? And make sure that they do feel respected and listened to, and that stuff gets implemented, especially if the person wants to be involved in that process, because that's awesome. I don't want to put people on the spot and say, you have a disability, you're going to be the champion of the disability cause at this place. Nobody wants to be voluntold, and not everyone has a comfortable relationship talking about these things. There's a lot of internal bias and stigma and journey things to work through. I don't know, had I not gone thrown into this work by accident almost, I don't know if I would have felt as strongly as I do about it now. I genuinely don't know, had I not been 13 years old and asked to talk about myself, if I would have felt comfortable ever talking about this. But that's neither here nor there. We can't really dabble in the what ifs. The second thing that I would tell you is to also seek out the stories of people with lived experience, not just the people you work with, but anywhere. Chances are people come to this topic, and I've learned this from all the years that I've advocated and have spoken publicly, people come to disability and neurodiversity topics because of someone they know. whether it's themselves, someone in their family, someone they work with, someone they're friends with. They want to just do better and they're curious, and that's awesome. And I want you to embrace that because this can feel awkward. This can feel kind of weird if you don't know. You're scared to offend me. You're scared to do the wrong thing. And embrace that and just keep learning. You want to seek out people to learn from, whether that's just passively following somebody on YouTube or other social media, whether that's talking to that person in your life to get a better understanding of how they navigate the world around them. So I really want us to think about this again. It's this very human thing. And of course, there's stuff you can do. You can always do trainings. You can always think about access as a compliance thing, but I don't want you to look at access as just mere compliance. One of my favorite quotes actually about accessibility comes from a campaign from an activist by the name of Alice Wong, and that was essentially that access is love. And the idea of that, it might sound kind of, new age perhaps to some people, but really that we do accessibility as a collective thing. We do it not as an afterthought because someone couldn't get in, but it's a way that we show people that we care, that we want them to succeed, that we want them to be able to participate. So I look at it as if when we look at this as an act of care and love towards other people, it really does make a difference. Everybody wants to feel safe. Everybody wants to feel like their voice matters, like they belong somewhere. If that's all we have to do is to build access, whatever that means to different people, disabled and non-disabled people alike, I'm all here for it.
I love it. Haley, thank you so much for your time. I wanted to tell you how much I appreciate you.
I appreciate you.